Hey everyone, and welcome! Have you ever wondered what's actually the #1 anime in Japan right now? Well, this week we're going to dive deep into the streaming numbers from that last week of March. We'll see who's on top and what the real diehard fans are watching. So let's get right into it.
All right, so what was the most watched anime in Japan last week? It's a simple question, right? But to get the real answer, we've got to look at a few of the biggest streaming services because, you'll see, each one tells a totally different story.
Okay, first up, top hits on general services. Think of this as our starting point. We're going to see what the broad mainstream audience is into. This will give us a really good baseline before we get into the more specialized stuff. And we're going to kick things off with a service called TVer. Now, TVer is mostly for catching up on shows that were on regular TV. So its anime chart, it's a fantastic window into what's breaking through to, like, the biggest possible audience.
And, wow, okay. The TVer chart is just packed with absolute titans. No surprise, right? At #1, you've got the massive hit, The Apothecary Diaries. Then you have these beloved mainstays like Detective Conan and Crayon Shinchan. But what's really interesting is that Jujutsu Kaisen and Frieren are right there too. That just proves they have that huge mainstream crossover appeal. It's pretty clear that on a general service like this, the big established names are the ones that rule.
All right, that brings us to our next section, the battleground of specialist services. We're leaving the mainstream behind now. This is where things get really interesting. We're heading into fan territory. You know, the platforms where the dedicated viewers are the ones who really drive the trends.
And first up in this zone is Anime Store. Look, if you want to know what the core die-hard anime community is really buzzing about, this is one of the best places to look, for sure.
Oh, and just a quick heads up here. The data from Anime Store is for the week ending March 23rd, so it's a little different from the others. But don't worry, it's still a perfect snapshot of what's hot.
Okay, and check this out. It's a totally different world over here. Yeah, Frieren snags the #1 spot, but look what it's surrounded by. A whole wave of these newer fantasy and, Isekai-style shows. Titles like The Jack of All Trades and The Easygoing Lord's Manor Defense. They're clearly a huge hit with this more dedicated audience.
All right, continuing on, let's check out ABEMA. It's another huge player in the streaming game, and it's known for having a ton of its own unique programming. It's a real hub for anime fans.
Now, ABEMA's chart is super interesting because it's this great mix of the established hits and some of the newer contenders. You've got Jujutsu Kaisen and Frieren fighting it out for #1, but then you also see last year's mega hit, Oshinoko, still holding on. And look, there are some of those same rising fantasy shows we just saw. It's a real mix.
Okay, finally, let's look at our last service, TELASA. This one's tied to a major TV network, TV Asahi, which gives it a pretty unique spot in the market. So let's see what people are watching over there.
And yeah, the TELASA chart feels like a really powerful mix of everything we've seen so far. You've got Frieren and Jujutsu Kaisen right at the top. No surprise there. But the rest of the list, it's filled out by those exact same popular fantasy shows that are doing well on the other dedicated services. You can really start to see a pattern here, can't you?
So that brings us to our next section, the cross-platform champions. We've looked at 4 different services, each with its own audience. Now it's time to put it all together and see which shows really, truly dominated across the board.
So let's do it. Which shows had that special something, that power to not just top 1 chart, but to show up in the top 5 again and again on every service we looked at? And our first undeniable champion has to be Frieren Beyond Journey's End. I mean, just look at this consistency. It's incredible. #1 on Anime Store and TELASA, #2 on ABEMA, and still hitting #4 on the super mainstream TVer. That kind of performance just screams immense popularity with, well, pretty much everyone, casual and hardcore fans alike. And right there with Frieren is the absolute unstoppable force that is Jujutsu Kaisen. You can see it right here. It was in the top 5 on every single service. It even snatched that #1 spot on ABEMA. It's just a true powerhouse, and the numbers show it has massive, widespread appeal. Now, beyond those 2 giants, we got to give a big shout out to these 3 breakout fantasy series. They just kept popping up in the top ranks on multiple specialist platforms. It really proves that these are the new hits that all the dedicated fans are flocking to.
All right, that brings us to our final section, the summary. So let's take a step back and recap what all this data really tells us about what's going on with anime streaming in Japan right now. So here's the key takeaway.
While the two biggest shows, Frieren and Jujutsu Kaisen, are popular everywhere, the real story is in the difference between the platforms. You've got the general audience on TVer sticking with the familiar, long-running stuff, but then you have the specialist services, and that's where you see the new trends really taking off. And right now, that trend is a huge wave of new fantasy anime.
And that pretty much wraps it up. But, these charts never ever stand still. As we're talking, the brand new spring season of anime is dropping. So, the big question I want to leave you with is this. Which of these new shows is going to have what it takes to break into this top tier? Who's going to challenge the champions next week? We'll just have to wait and see. Thanks so much for tuning in.